Hello, friends. Today we are going to talk about the book, Talking with Psychopaths and Savages, A Journey into the Evil Mind by Christopher Berry-Dee. There was a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a criminal psychology student in her final year at university, and she thought she understood evil. She had read all the textbooks, studied all the case files, and written countless essays about psychopathy, sociopathy, and criminal behavior. But understanding evil from a textbook and understanding it face to face are two completely different things. Sarah was about to learn that lesson the hard way. It started with an assignment from her professor, Dr. Martinez. He was known for pushing his students beyond their comfort zones, for making them confront the darkness that most people only read about in newspapers. One afternoon, after class, Dr. Martinez approached Sarah. "I have an opportunity for you," he said. "There's a documentary crew doing research on psychopathic criminals. They need a research assistant, someone who can help analyze interview footage and behavioral patterns. I think you'd be perfect for it." Sarah's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of hands-on experience she needed. "I'm in," she said without hesitation. What Sarah didn't know was that this opportunity would take her deep into a world she had only studied from a safe distance. A world where manipulation, violence, and evil weren't just concepts in a textbook, but living, breathing realities. A week later, Sarah found herself sitting in a small office, watching grainy footage of prison interviews. The documentary was based on the work of Christopher Berry-Dee, a criminologist who had spent decades interviewing some of the world's most dangerous criminals. Murderers, serial killers, rapists. People who had committed acts so horrific that Sarah sometimes had to pause the footage just to catch her breath. The first interview she watched was with a man named Michael. Michael had been convicted of murdering 3 women in cold blood. On screen, he looked ordinary. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and a calm demeanor. He spoke softly, almost politely. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't give him a second glance. But as Sarah listened to him speak, something unsettling began to emerge. Michael wasn't remorseful. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even defensive. He spoke about his crimes the way someone might talk about a trip to the grocery store. Casual, detached, almost bored. "I didn't feel anything when I did it," Michael said on the tape. "People think there's some big emotional moment, some rush or guilt or anger. But there's nothing. It's just something that happened." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was her first real glimpse into the mind of a psychopath. Not a movie villain, not a fictional character, but a real person who had taken lives and felt absolutely nothing. Over the next few weeks, Sarah immersed herself in the footage. She watched interview after interview, each one more disturbing than the last. There was David, who had tortured and killed animals as a child before graduating to human victims. There was Linda, a woman who had poisoned her husband and showed no remorse, only annoyance that she had been caught. There was Robert, who smiled when he talked about the pain he had inflicted on others. Sarah started noticing patterns. These people weren't all the same, but they shared certain traits: a lack of empathy, a sense of entitlement, an inability to feel guilt or remorse. And most disturbingly, many of them were incredibly charming. They could look you in the eye, smile, and make you feel like they were the most trustworthy person in the world. This was the mask of sanity that she had read about in her textbooks. It was real, and it was terrifying. One night, Sarah was watching an interview with a man named Thomas. Thomas had been convicted of killing 5 people over the course of a decade. He was articulate, well-spoken, and eerily calm. At one point in the interview, the interviewer asked him, "Do you ever think about the families of your victims?" Thomas paused, tilted his head slightly, and then smiled. "Why would I?" he said. "They're not my problem." Sarah stopped the video. She felt sick. This wasn't just a lack of empathy. This was a complete disconnection from humanity. Thomas didn't see other people as people. He saw them as objects, tools, obstacles. They existed only in relation to what they could do for him or how they affected his life. Sarah realized that this was the core of psychopathy. These individuals didn't operate by the same moral rules as everyone else because they fundamentally didn't understand or care about those rules. The more Sarah learned, the more questions she had. What makes someone like this? Is it genetics, childhood trauma, brain abnormalities, or is it something else entirely? She started digging deeper into the research. She read about studies showing that psychopaths have different brain structures, particularly in areas related to empathy and impulse control. She read about the role of early childhood experiences, abuse, neglect, and exposure to violence. But she also read about cases where psychopaths came from loving, stable homes. There was no single answer. It seemed that psychopathy was a complex mix of biology, environment, and perhaps something else, something darker that couldn't be easily explained. One afternoon, Sarah's supervisor on the documentary project, a man named James, called her into his office. James had worked with Christopher Berry-Dee directly and had been present for some of the most chilling interviews ever recorded. "I can see this is getting to you," James said. Sarah nodded. She hadn't been sleeping well. The interviews played in her mind on repeat. "That's normal," James continued. "When you stare into the abyss stares back. That's not just a quote. It's the truth. You can't spend this much time in the presence of evil, even recorded evil, without it affecting you." Sarah asked the question that had been haunting her. How do you do it? How do you sit across from these people and not lose your mind? James leaned back in his chair. "You remember that you're not them. You remember that the ability to feel horror, disgust, and empathy is what makes you human. They don't have that. And that's their weakness, not their strength." Sarah thought about that conversation for days. She realized that one of the most dangerous myths about psychopaths is that they're somehow superior, smarter, more evolved. But they're not. They're broken. They're missing something fundamental that makes us human. And while that makes them dangerous, it also makes them pitiable in a strange way. But Sarah knew better than to let pity turn into sympathy. That was one of the first lessons she had learned from the footage. Psychopaths are master manipulators. They can sense weakness, and they exploit it. If you show them sympathy, they'll use it against you. One of the most chilling examples Sarah encountered was an interview with a woman named Rebecca. Rebecca had been convicted of murdering her 2 children. During the interview, she cried. She expressed regret. She talked about how much she missed her kids. To the untrained eye, she seemed genuinely remorseful. But as Sarah analyzed the footage more carefully, she noticed something. Rebecca's tears never reached her eyes. Her expressions of grief were perfectly timed, almost rehearsed, and when she thought the camera wasn't focused on her, her face would go completely blank, emotionless. Rebecca wasn't sad. She was performing sadness because she knew that's what people expected to see. Sarah learned that this was a common tactic among psychopaths. They study human behavior the way an actor studies a script. They learn what emotions to display in certain situations, not because they feel them, but because it helps them manipulate others. As Sarah continued her work on the project, she began to understand why Christopher Berry-Dee had dedicated his life to studying these individuals. It wasn't about glorifying evil or being fascinated by darkness for its own sake. It was about understanding the nature of evil so that society could better protect itself. One of the key insights Sarah gained from Berry-Dee's work was the importance of recognizing red flags early. Many of the criminals he interviewed had shown warning signs long before they committed their most serious crimes. Cruelty to animals as children, a pattern of lying and manipulation, a lack of close, genuine relationships, impulsive behavior, a grandiose sense of self-importance. These weren't guarantees that someone would become a violent criminal, but they were warning signs that shouldn't be ignored. Sarah also learned about the concept of the psychopathic continuum. Not all psychopaths are violent criminals. Some function in society, often in high-powered positions. They might be CEOs, lawyers, politicians, or surgeons. They use their lack of empathy and their manipulative skills to succeed in competitive environments. They're not necessarily breaking the law, but they leave a trail of damaged relationships and hurt people in their wake. This realization was both enlightening and disturbing for Sarah. It meant that psychopaths weren't just locked away in prisons. They were everywhere, hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy. One evening, Sarah attended a lecture given by a forensic psychologist who had worked with Berry-Dee. The psychologist talked about the experience of interviewing psychopaths and how it differed from interviewing other criminals. When you interview most criminals, the psychologist explained, there's usually some level of humanity you can connect with. They might have committed terrible acts, but you can still see the person underneath. With psychopaths, it's different. It's like looking into a void. There's no real person there, just a collection of learned behaviors and manipulations designed to get what they want. The psychologist went on to describe the unsettling experience of being manipulated by a psychopath during an interview. They study you while you're studying them. They're looking for your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, and if they find them, they'll exploit them. I've had psychopaths tell me things about myself, about my fears or insecurities, that I'd never shared with anyone. They're that good at reading people. Sarah felt a chill. She thought about all the footage she'd watched, all the interviews she'd analyzed. Had these people been studying their interviewers? Were they playing a game even while locked in a prison cell? The answer, she realized, was yes. For psychopaths, life is a game, and other people are merely pieces on the board. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's understanding of evil deepened. She learned about the different types of psychopaths. There were organized psychopaths who carefully planned their crimes, who were methodical and controlled. Then there were disorganized psychopaths who acted impulsively, who left messy crime scenes and were often caught more quickly. She learned about the role of fantasy in psychopathic crimes. Many of the killers Berry-Dee had interviewed talked about elaborate fantasies they had developed over years, sometimes decades, before acting on them. These fantasies gave them a sense of power and control. And when reality didn't match the fantasy, they often escalated, committing more and more violent acts, in an attempt to achieve the perfect crime that existed in their minds. Sarah also learned about victim selection. Contrary to popular belief, most psychopathic criminals don't choose their victims randomly. They look for vulnerability. They target people who are isolated, trusting, or in need of help. They use charm and manipulation to gain access, and then they strike. One of the most disturbing cases Sarah studied involved a man named Gregory. Gregory had volunteered at a homeless shelter for years. He was well-liked, respected, and considered a pillar of the community. But behind this facade, Gregory was targeting vulnerable homeless people, people who wouldn't be missed, and murdering them. He committed at least 12 murders before he was finally caught. When asked why he chose homeless victims, Gregory's answer was chillingly pragmatic. No one cares about them. No one looks for them. They're easy. Sarah felt a wave of anger and sadness. These weren't just crimes against individuals. These were crimes against society's most vulnerable members, people who deserved protection and care, but instead met the worst kind of predator. One day, James asked Sarah if she wanted to observe a real interview. A documentary crew was going to interview a convicted serial killer named Alan, and they needed someone to help with behavioral analysis. Sarah's hands trembled as she considered the offer. This would be different from watching recorded footage. This would be real, in person, face to face with evil. After a long pause, Sarah said yes. A week later, Sarah found herself sitting in a prison visitation room, watching through a one-way mirror as the interview team set up. Alan was brought in, shackled, and accompanied by guards. He was a large man in his early 60s with cold, calculating eyes. As soon as he sat down, Sarah noticed something. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying himself. The interview began. Alan spoke about his crimes with a detached, almost clinical tone. He described murders the way a chef might describe a recipe, step by step, without emotion. But Sarah noticed something else. Every so often, Alan would glance toward the one-way mirror, almost as if he knew people were watching. And when he did, a slight smile would cross his face. He was performing. He was enjoying the attention. At one point, the interviewer asked Alan if he had any regrets. Alan leaned back in his chair, pretended to think for a moment, and then said, "My only regret is getting caught." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. After the interview, Sarah felt emotionally drained. She had just spent an hour in the presence of someone who had taken multiple lives and felt nothing but mild annoyance at being imprisoned. James found her in the observation room, staring at the now empty chair where Alan had sat. "You okay?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. How do people like that exist? How can someone be that empty inside? James sighed. That's the question Berry-Dee has been trying to answer his entire career. And the truth is, we still don't fully understand. But what we do know is that they exist, and we have to be aware of them. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued to assist with the project, but something had changed inside her. She was no longer just a student studying theory. She had looked into the eyes of evil, even if it was through a mirror, and she had felt its cold, empty gaze. But Sarah also felt a sense of purpose. She realized that understanding psychopaths wasn't just an academic exercise. It was essential for protecting society. Law enforcement, mental health professionals, and ordinary people needed to understand the warning signs, the manipulation tactics, and the utter lack of empathy that defined these individuals. Sarah began to study the work of Christopher Berry-Dee more intensely. She read his books, watched his interviews, and studied his methodology. She learned that Berry-Dee approached his subjects with a mixture of professional curiosity and cautious distance. He never forgot what they were capable of, but he also never treated them as if they were monsters from another world. They were human, or at least they had human bodies. But something essential was missing. One of the concepts that stuck with Sarah was Berry-Dee's discussion of the superficial charm that many psychopaths possess. This wasn't just about being friendly or likable. It was a calculated tool. Psychopaths study social interactions and learn to mimic appropriate responses. They become expert actors, playing whatever role will get them what they want. Sarah thought about all the times in her life she had met people who seemed too good to be true. People who were charming, confident, and seemed to have all the right answers. How many of them might have been psychopaths? How many people had she encountered who were wearing a mask, hiding their true nature? This paranoia was something James had warned her about. One of the dangers of studying psychopaths, he had said, is that you start to see them everywhere. You become suspicious of everyone. But the reality is that true psychopaths are relatively rare, maybe 1% of the population. The trick is to be aware without becoming paranoid. Sarah took that advice to heart. She learned to look for patterns rather than jumping to conclusions. A person who occasionally displayed selfish behavior wasn't a psychopath, but a person who consistently manipulated others, who showed no genuine empathy, who had a pattern of destructive behavior without remorse. That person might be someone to be wary of. As her work on the documentary project came to an end, Sarah reflected on everything she had learned. She had entered this experience thinking she understood evil. She left understanding that evil was far more complex, far more mundane, and far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. Evil wasn't always a monster with fangs and claws. Sometimes it wore a suit and tie. Sometimes it smiled and shook your hand. Sometimes it volunteered at your local charity. The mask of sanity was real, and it was everywhere. But Sarah also learned something else. The fact that she could feel horror, that she could feel empathy for the victims, that she could lie awake at night troubled by what she had seen. All of that proved she was different from the people she had studied. Her humanity wasn't a weakness. It was her strength. Sarah graduated with honors and went on to pursue a career in forensic psychology. She never forgot the lessons she learned from Christopher Berry-Dee's work. She carried them with her into every case, every interview, every analysis. Years later, Sarah found herself training new students, passing on the knowledge she had gained. She would tell them, understanding evil doesn't mean you have to become hardened or cynical. It means you have to be realistic. Psychopaths exist. They're rare, but they're real. And the more we understand them, the better we can protect potential victims and create a safer society. One of her students once asked her, "Do you think psychopaths can change? Can they be rehabilitated?" Sarah thought about all the interviews she had watched, all the research she had read, all the experts she had spoken to. "The evidence suggests that true psychopaths don't change," she said carefully. "They can learn to control their behavior if it benefits them, but they don't suddenly develop empathy or a conscience. That's why early intervention is so important. If we can identify warning signs in childhood and provide appropriate intervention, we might be able to prevent some of these individuals from becoming violent criminals. But once they've crossed certain lines, rehabilitation becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible." This was a hard truth, but it was one that Sarah had come to accept. Not everyone could be saved. Not everyone wanted to be saved. Some people were fundamentally broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. Sarah also learned about the impact of psychopaths on their victims and society. The ripples of harm extended far beyond the immediate crime. Families were destroyed. Communities were traumatized. Trust was broken. Survivors often struggled with PTSD, anxiety, and depression for years after their ordeal. Understanding this helped Sarah appreciate the importance of her work. It wasn't just about studying criminals. It was about giving voice to victims, about helping law enforcement catch predators before they could harm more people, about educating the public so they could protect themselves. One of the most powerful lessons Sarah took from Berry-Dee's work was the importance of listening to intuition. Many victims of psychopaths reported that they had felt something was off about their attacker, but had ignored those feelings because the person seemed so normal, so charming. Berry-Dee emphasized that human beings have evolved instincts for detecting danger. When something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why, it's worth paying attention to that feeling. Sarah began teaching workshops on personal safety, helping people understand the warning signs of manipulation and predatory behavior. She taught them about love bombing, the tactic where a psychopath showers someone with attention and affection to quickly create emotional dependence. She taught them about gaslighting, where a manipulator makes their victim doubt their own perceptions and reality. She taught them about isolation tactics, where an abuser gradually cuts their victim off from friends and family. These weren't just abstract concepts. These were real tactics used by real predators, and knowing about them could save lives. As Sarah's career progressed, she occasionally consulted on criminal cases. She would review evidence, analyze behavior, and provide profiles to help law enforcement. Each case was a reminder of why her work mattered. One case in particular stood out. A man named Stephen was suspected of murdering his business partner, but there was no direct evidence. Sarah was asked to review interviews with Stephen and provide a behavioral assessment. As she watched the footage, she noticed the telltale signs. Stephen showed no genuine emotion when discussing his missing partner. He was more concerned about the impact on his business than about his partner's welfare. He contradicted himself multiple times, but showed no embarrassment or concern when these contradictions were pointed out. And most tellingly, when asked directly if he had killed his partner, Stephen smiled before answering. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but Sarah caught it. That smile revealed what Stephen was really feeling, a sense of satisfaction, of having gotten away with something. Sarah's analysis helped investigators focus their efforts, and eventually, they found the evidence they needed. Stephen was arrested and convicted. His partner's family finally got justice. After the case closed, one of the detectives thanked Sarah. "How did you know?" he asked. "How could you tell he was guilty just from watching him talk?" Sarah thought about all the hours she had spent studying psychopaths, all the interviews she had analyzed, all the patterns she had learned to recognize. "It's not magic," she said. "It's pattern recognition. Once you understand how these people think and behave, the signs become clear. They can't help but reveal themselves, even when they think they're being clever." Sarah also learned about the differences between psychopaths and sociopaths, a distinction that confused many people. While the terms are often used interchangeably, there are differences. Psychopaths are generally thought to be born with neurological differences that make them incapable of empathy. Sociopaths, on the other hand, may develop their antisocial behavior due to environmental factors like abuse or trauma. Psychopaths tend to be more controlled and calculated. Sociopaths tend to be more impulsive and erratic. Both are dangerous, but in different ways. Understanding these distinctions helped Sarah provide more accurate assessments and recommendations. Over the years, Sarah encountered skepticism from some people. They would say things like, "You're giving these criminals too much attention. You're making them famous." Sarah understood this concern, but she also knew it missed the point. "We're not glorifying them," she would explain. "We're studying them the same way a doctor studies a disease. You don't ignore cancer because you don't want to give it attention. You study it, you understand it, and you figure out how to fight it." That's what we're doing with psychopathy. Berry-Dee's work had always emphasized this point. His interviews weren't designed to make criminals famous. They were designed to pull back the curtain, to show the world what these individuals were really like, to educate people so they could protect themselves and their loved ones. One of the most chilling aspects of Sarah's research was learning about psychopaths who were never caught. Statistical estimates suggest that for every serial killer who is captured, there may be several who are never identified. They blend into society, moving from place to place, leaving a trail of victims but never staying in one area long enough to establish a clear pattern. This knowledge haunted Sarah. It meant that right now, at this very moment, there were predators walking among us. They could be anyone, anywhere. The thought was terrifying, but it also reinforced the importance of awareness and education. The more people understood about psychopathic behavior, the better chance society had of identifying and stopping these individuals. Sarah also studied cases of psychopaths who committed crimes other than murder. Fraud, embezzlement, emotional abuse, stalking. These crimes didn't make headlines the way serial killings did, but they destroyed lives nonetheless. Financial psychopaths could ruin dozens or even hundreds of people, stealing their savings, destroying their credit, leaving them financially devastated. Emotional psychopaths could trap their victims in abusive relationships, systematically breaking down their self-esteem, isolating them from support systems, and causing lasting psychological damage. Sarah realized that society tended to focus on violent psychopaths while overlooking these other types. But they were all part of the same spectrum, all driven by the same lack of empathy and remorse. As Sarah looked back on her journey from naive student to experienced forensic psychologist, she felt a mix of emotions. She had seen things that would haunt her forever. She had looked into the abyss that James had warned her about, but she had also found purpose. She was making a difference. She was helping catch criminals, protect potential victims, and educate the public. And she owed much of that to the work of Christopher Berry-Dee, whose fearless exploration of the darkest corners of the human mind had paved the way for researchers and professionals like herself. One evening, Sarah sat in her office looking at a photograph on her wall. It was a quote from philosopher Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Sarah had spent her career refusing to do nothing. She had confronted evil, studied it, understood it, and fought against it, and she would continue to do so for as long as she was able. Because in a world where psychopaths exist, where predators hide behind masks of sanity, where evil walks among us, wearing a friendly smile, the work of understanding and exposing that evil is never done. Sarah closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there were people who would never feel empathy, who would manipulate and harm others without remorse, who would wear their masks and play their games. But somewhere out there were also people like Sarah, professionals and ordinary citizens who were aware, who were educated, who were prepared. The battle between good and evil wasn't just something that happened in books or movies. It was happening right now, every day, in every community. And the more people understood about the nature of evil, the better chance good had of winning. That was the legacy of Christopher Berry-Dee's work. Not to celebrate darkness, but to illuminate it. Not to glorify monsters, but to expose them. Not to spread fear, but to spread knowledge and awareness. And that was the mission Sarah had dedicated her life to continuing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, leave a thank you with a heart in the comments. Please don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.